were 4 sets of remains. You remember they were found last fall in these burlap bags. Then another body was found
Off-duty cop walking his dog stumbles on a woman's dead body in a remote beach. That beach turned burial ground with 3 more sets of female remains found. Bombshell tonight. In the last hours, investigators unearthed 4, possibly 5 more bodies on that same
developments in the hunt for a possible serial killer on New York's Long Island. Since December, as many as 8 bodies have been found on a desolate stretch of beach there. Now, investigators are examining some clues that point to a suspect who may be familiar with law enforcement.
He knows what he's doing and understands what crime scene investigation is all about, or he's just been lucky up until now.
Hey you, and welcome. My name is Mike, and in this old video, we're going to Long Island and taking a look at one of the most infamous unsolved cases in recent times. Yes, you guessed it if you somehow didn't read the thumbnail or title of the video. We're looking at the Long Island serial killer, or L.I.S.K, because acronyms are cool. I touched on this case very briefly before, but I think it deserves a deep dive. I mean, this is an unidentified person who has possibly taken up to 16 lives in recent times in this relatively small area, more specifically Suffolk County, Long Island. We'll get into it from the very beginning and take a look at, although the person behind it is still unidentified to this day, there are a number of suspects we can point the finger at. So, alright, let's go. The story of L.I.S.K began in May 2010 when a young woman by the name of Shannon Gilbert disappeared in the quiet, secluded community of Oak Beach, Long Island. Dense vegetation separates the ocean-facing Oak Beach from the road, leaving it a secluded spot. A little island on a long one. On the night of May 1st, 2010, 24-year-old Shannon, at the time a Craigslist escort, had been with Joseph Brewer, a first-time client, at his home. Shannon was a warm-hearted person raised primarily in foster care. She fell into prostitution due to an unstable upbringing. She craved the spotlight and aspired to be a professional singer, though she used her money from her work to reconnect with her family. Shannon's date that night would pay for a gift for her mother, Mary. Although Mary later told reporters she had tried to talk Shannon out of going that night. She said that just having Shannon around for her birthday would be present enough. Shortly before Shannon was last seen, she made a 23-minute 911 call while still at Joseph's home, screaming, and said, "They're trying to kill me." According to a deposition Joseph later gave, Shannon, who had been diagnosed as bipolar but was not taking medication, became inexplicably unhinged, and Joseph asked Shannon's driver, Michael Pack, to help end the date. At some point after placing the 911 call, Shannon ran from Joseph and Michael into the darkness, banging on neighbors' doors and begging for help. By the time the police arrived, called by other neighbors who had heard Shannon screaming and banging, Shannon was gone. Shannon's family then filed a missing persons report, and that was it. It would be 7 months before they found her. Wait, did I say her? Oh, I meant 4 completely separate other women's remains found in the immediate area. All of them about the same age as Shannon, all of them were escorts who used Craigslist, and all of them were about the same body type as Shannon. Weird, huh? On December 10th, 2010, Detective John Malia, accompanied by a canine in training, found skeletal remains along the northern edge of Ocean Parkway. Initially, investigators assumed John had found Shannon. He didn't. He stumbled across a serial killer's graveyard. The remains John found were identified as Melissa Bartholomew of the Bronx, a young woman who had advertised escort services on Craigslist and was last seen in July 2009. A man presumed to be her killer made repeated calls from her phone to her younger sister in the days after she disappeared. The sister described the anonymous caller as vulgar, mocking, and insulting. The caller asked if she was a whore like her sister. Police traced some of the calls to Madison Square Garden and Massapequa, but were unable to determine who was making the calls. Melissa's mother said that there were a lot of calls to Manorville in Suffolk County from Melissa's phone around the time of her disappearance. Manorville, a town located in eastern Long Island and has a population of about 14,000, it might come up again. Maybe, we'll see. Soon after, while John was searching the immediate area, he came across the remains of 3 more people near Gilgo Beach.
We are here today to announce that all 4 women whose remains were discovered in Gilgo Beach last month have been positively identified. The victims are Maureen Brainard Barnes, Melissa Barthelemy, Amber Lynn Costello, and previously announced Megan Waterman of Scarborough, Maine.
It does appear to us at this time that the same person or persons are responsible for all of these murders. They were killed in another location, and their remains were transported to the Gilgo Beach area that you see over there.
Maureen Brainard Barnes got into the escort business because she needed money to pay for her home. Once she got caught up with her mortgage, she left the sex industry for 7 months, but returned to it after receiving an eviction notice. She was last seen on July 10th, 2009, around the same time as Melissa Barthelemy. Shortly after her disappearance, a friend of Maureen's received a call from a man on an unfamiliar number. The man claimed that he had just seen Maureen and that she was alive and staying at a whorehouse in Queens. Sounds kinda like the same guy who called Melissa's sister. Huh, what are the odds? He refused to identify himself and could not tell her the location of the house. He told her he would call back and give her the address, but he never called again. She said the man had no discernible New York or Boston accent. On the night Megan Waterman disappeared, June 6, 2010, she had been advertising her escort services on Craigslist. Megan was staying at a motel in Hauppauge, New York, 15 miles from Gilgo Beach. On the night that Amber Costello vanished, September 2nd, 2010, she had received several calls from a client offering to pay her $1,500 for her services. Her sister, also a sex worker at one time, reportedly said in 2012 that she would continue to use Craigslist in the same manner as her sister in an effort to catch her sister's killer. Not much luck there so far. So, at this point, we have 4 bodies and 1 missing woman, Shannon Gilbert. All had worked as escorts, all were petite, and all were about the same age. Because of the proximity of their burial ground to a secluded waterfront called Gilgo Beach, they became known as the Gilgo Four. And the person behind this? Did they have any leads as to who killed these 4 women and what became of Shannon? Not a single one, but the work of L.I.S.K had finally been found.
Shannon Gilbert went missing more than a year ago. The 24-year-old sex worker from New Jersey was last seen alive here in Oak Beach. For Shannon's mother, Mary, it's been more than a year of fear and confusion, of waiting and wondering for word about her daughter's whereabouts.
I just wish that they would find her or find the person involved and catch the psychopath who's doing this and put an end to it.
Then, almost a year to the day after the first 4 bodies were found, on December 13th, 2011, Shannon's body was found in a marsh near Oak Beach. Now, during this period of a year, when the first 4 bodies were found in December 2010 to when Shannon's body was finally found in December 2011, 6 more bodies were found in that year while police continued to search. 6 more. 5 of which remain unidentified to this day. That brings the number of bodies found in this 1-year time frame to 10, not counting Shannon. The identifiable one was Jessica Taylor, who went missing in July 2003. On July 26, 2003, her naked and dismembered torso, missing its head and hands, was discovered 45 miles east of Gilgo Beach in Manorville, New York. Huh, weird coincidence, where one of the missing women, Melissa Barthélemy, she made a lot of calls to Manorville. Plastic sheeting was found underneath her torso, and a tattoo on her body had been mutilated with a sharp instrument. Then, in March 2011, the remains of a skull, a pair of hands, and a forearm found at Gilgo were matched to Jessica. She had worked in Washington, D.C. and Manhattan as a prostitute. So that's 11 victims, at least 6 of which worked as prostitutes. And police suspect that they are all the work of a single serial killer, known as the Long Island serial killer, the Gilgo Beach killer, or the Craigslist Ripper. Well, the Long Island serial killer actually emerged as early as 1996, but no one knew it at the time. That was 14 years earlier. A couple found 2 severed female legs wrapped in plastic in 1996 while taking a stroll through a beach on Fire Island. When the bodies were discovered, a cop involved in the 1996 investigation called police to recommend running a DNA test, which matched the legs found in 1996 to one of the bodies found near Gilgo Beach in 2011. Now, before a medical examiner had completed his report on Shannan Gilbert's remains, the police commissioner of the area told reporters that he believed Shannan's death was an accident, not a homicide, something that angered Shannan's family, who believed she had been murdered. And that opened the police department to accusations that they weren't properly investigating her death. The Suffolk County medical examiner eventually ruled that Shannan's cause of death was inconclusive. Her cause of death was death.
I was optimistic when I first walked in, but now I'm more frustrated and angry than ever. I was hoping for something more substantial and solid, but it's all I got was betrayal and misleading trust. And no matter what it takes, I'm going to keep fighting for my daughter and for my family until the truth comes out, no matter how long it takes.
Her family hired an independent coroner to perform a follow-up autopsy, which was also inconclusive, but found indications that Shannan may have been strangled due to damaged bones in her neck. She had no drugs in her system, however the coroner said the tests actually proved nothing, since Shannan's body was in harsh elements for more than a year and a half before they finally found her.
Today we have met with the medical examiner and the doctor in the medical examiner's office who performed the investigation of Shannan Gilbert's death. There doesn't seem to be any evidence whatsoever of a drowning. Now, the medical examiner claims that the tests render their conclusion inconclusive. They cannot conclude at all as to how this woman died. But there's something missing. The 2 missing bones are the bones of your neck, right here. These 2 bones that fuse the part of the neck where strangling ordinarily takes place when strangling occurs are missing.
There are some differences, though, between Shannan's case and the original Gilgo 4 bodies that were found. The bodies near Gilgo Beach were found buried. At least 2 of the bodies were wrapped in burlap sacks, while Shannan was found partially exposed in the marsh, with some clothes and personal items found a few hundred yards away. There is something strange, however, about her death, and if it was really connected to the Long Island serial killer. In fact, some have said her death was just a coincidence, that it was in the same area other bodies were found. But Shannan was less secretive than the other 4 about where she was going and what she was doing the night she disappeared. There were others there with her, like her driver, for instance. So did Shannan just run off into the night? And if Joseph Brewer wasn't a killer and Michael Pack, her driver, wasn't a killer, did she just stumble into a marsh and randomly come across L.I.S.K? Seems unlikely, but There's more to it than that. So this was all 8 years ago. The Long Island serial killer still remains unidentified. But then, on January 23rd, 2013, over a year after Shannan Gilbert's remains had been found, a woman walking her dog found human remains intentionally buried in a small piece of brush in a sandy area along the shore in Nassau County. The remains are believed to be of a woman between the ages of 20 and 30, possibly Asian. There was trauma caused to her bones. It is believed she was buried before 2012. The most recent possible victim was a 31-year-old Yugoslavian woman named Natasha Jugo, who had a history of paranoia. In 2013, she drove her car out to Ocean Parkway at 4 in the morning for unknown reasons, and, much like Shannan Gilbert, disappeared, leaving her wallet and some of her clothes behind. That June, 3 months after she vanished, a group of beachgoers spotted her body floating motionless in the sea. However, I think it's unlikely she was murdered. None of the other bodies were found floating in the ocean. It was likely she either drowned or committed suicide.
As we approach the anniversary, on behalf of the Suffolk County Police Department, I want to convey to the loved ones and the family of all the victims that we are dedicated to do everything we can to solve this case. I've invited the FBI to work in close collaboration with the Suffolk County Police Department in investigating these murders, and I want to thank the FBI for agreeing to do that.
Now, the call Shannan Gilbert made the night she disappeared, that 23-minute 911 call, has come under a lot of speculation. No shit. A judge has two times, ordered the police to release that 23-minute 911 call to the public. The police are fighting against it and won't release it. This is still going on today. In October of 2018, the judge said the police department failed to provide the slightest intimation of how or why giving Shannan's family access to the tapes would compromise any aspect of their protracted investigation. Department lawyers argue that releasing the tape would jeopardize an ongoing investigation. But I thought you said her death was an accident. If Shannan Gilbert wasn't a victim of L.I.S.K, and the police seem pretty sure about that, apparently, then what would be the harm in releasing the contents of the call? What's the ongoing investigation? You said she died and her death was inconclusive, but you don't think it was murder. So obviously, many think the police are trying to cover up something, or at least there is definitely something on that call police don't want people to know about. The fight to get that tape out, or keep it in, is still going on to this very day. So, there have been a few suspects in this case. First of all, let's start with the man she was with that night, Joseph Brewer. Even though she was allegedly acting erratically, was heard saying that they're going to kill me in her 911 call, the police did not find any evidence of wrongdoing, and Joseph Brewer was quickly cleared as a suspect. Dr. Peter Hackett, a local physician, is a person who came under a lot of scrutiny, especially by Shannan's family and her mother, Mary. They've accused him of encountering Shannan after she ran off from the neighbors who called 911 and giving her drugs that contributed to her death. Peter has consistently denied ever meeting Shannan. Which sounds like a lie. You'll see why. Kind of. In 2012, Shannan's family filed a civil suit against Peter, alleging that he negligently administered medical care and drugs and caused her wrongful death. Shannan's mother Mary claimed he called her a few days after Shannan disappeared in 2011, saying he ran a home for wayward women and had taken her in for a brief period on the morning she was last seen, an accusation that Peter has denied. Cue the Curb Your Enthusiasm theme, because although Peter said he never called Mary, phone records said he did.
What about all the other girls? Sarah! Jesus!
What was that?
My defibrillator. Son of 911. No, don't. No, it's all right. I'm a doctor.
And he later admitted to calling her. He said he simply called Mary to offer his support. Why would he call her? Why would he know Mary? Why would he call her regardless? That's weird as hell. I think he just wanted the attention of being a serial killer without actually having to, In 2013, however, a judge dismissed a large portion of the civil suit, including all the counts for wrongful death against Peter. Now, there has been no evidence to show that Peter encountered Shannon on the morning she disappeared. Peter Hackett's wife, son, and daughter were living at his house in Oak Beach at the time of Shannon's disappearance. So, he wouldn't have been alone. Suspicious? Yes. Killer? Probably not. But definitely one to keep an eye on.
A grisly murder for a family already torn apart by tragedy. The mother of Gilgo Beach victim Shannon Gilbert found stabbed to death inside her home, and one of her own daughters is accused of the crime.
In 2016, Shannon Gilbert's younger sister Sarah stabbed her mother Mary to death. And so went a key witness in the case against Peter, and one of the loudest critics of the police, who insisted until her death that her daughter's case should be investigated as a homicide. Sarah Gilbert was diagnosed with schizophrenia and was hospitalized 10 times in the 3 years before killing her mother. She pleaded not guilty to Mary Gilbert's murder by reason of insanity. Later, police revealed that Peter Hackett had a history of inserting himself into or exaggerating his role in certain events. He was just a busybody who wanted attention, it seems. And so Peter Hackett was cleared by police. Another suspect is James Burke, who became police chief of Suffolk County 2 years after Shannon's disappearance. He had joined the Suffolk County Police Department as a beat cop at age 21. A decade later, in the mid-1990s, he was subject to an internal investigation due to his romantic relationship with a convicted prostitute and drug offender, who reportedly had access to his police cruiser and his weapon. The investigation found that James was responsible for unbecoming conduct, and he was passed over for a promotion as a result. The attorney for Shannon Gilbert's family said that an escort who had conducted business with former police chief James Burke claimed that he was well connected to the Long Island serial killings. Or killer. In February 2016, James Burke pled guilty to charges of assaulting and threatening a suspect, Christopher Loeb, in 2012, who had been taken into custody without access to a lawyer after he stole a duffel bag from James Burke's unlocked car. A bag that is believed to have contained pornography and sex toys belonging to James. He conspired with law enforcement witnesses to cover up the assault, reportedly intimidating members of his squad to keep silent. In November of that year, he was sentenced to 46 months in prison for the unlawful interrogation and abuse of a suspect. James Burke was reported to have blocked an FBI probe into the L.I.S.K case during his time as police chief. And it's also been alleged that whoever the killer is, he knows a lot about police activity, about police tactics, and he used them to hide his work. The final suspect, or let's just say the final primary one, is a convicted killer, John Bitrolf. On September 12, 2017, the Suffolk County prosecutor said that John Bitrolf, a married carpenter and a Suffolk County resident, more specifically, John lived in Manorville. Now, where have I heard that before? The prosecutor said John was a suspect in at least one of the L.I.S.K murders, which is interesting because they all seem connected. She stated that John was likely responsible for the deaths of the other women too, and there were similarities between the Gilgo Beach crime scenes and John's known murders, for which he was convicted in May 2017 and sentenced in September.
The defendant, John Bitroff, has been indicted for 2 counts of murder in the second degree for the intentional murders of Rita Tangretti Beinlich and also Colleen McNamee. Both of the women were brutally beaten and strangled.
You see, John was arrested for murder in 2014, linked by DNA found on 2 prostitute homicide victims, Rita Tangretti and Colleen McNamee, whose bodies were found in 1993 and 1994, both in Suffolk County. What is going on there? John Bitroff was convicted in May 2017 of these murders, and in September of that year sentenced to consecutive terms of 25 years for each murder. Now, the Suffolk County Police did not comment on the fact that he is a suspect in the L.I.S.K case, due to the active homicide investigation of the murders. John's attorney, however, rejected the prosecutor's assertion, saying, Mr. Bitroff maintains his innocence in the deaths of Ms. Tangretti and Ms. McNamee, and any insinuation that he had anything to do with the Gilgo killings is laughable and meant to simply attract headlines. Yeah, it's hilarious. Well, I'm not laughing because John Bitroff lived in Manorville, where just 3 miles away, the torsos of Jessica Taylor and another unidentified victim were found. And also, the daughter of Rita Tangretti, one of the victims he was sentenced for, unrelated to L.I.S.K but found in the same area. So the daughter of one of his victims was also friends with Melissa Bartholomew, one of the actual L.I.S.K victims. What a coincidence. And Melissa Bartholomew's mother said that she had made a lot of phone calls to the Manorville area shortly before she died. John Bitroff was also a hunter and was said to enjoy killing animals. Again, enjoying killing animals means no good. Now, according to the profile, L.I.S.K is not a native New Yorker. Linguistic experts came to this conclusion based on voicemails and recordings L.I.S.K had left for the victims' families, and apparently has a very neutral accent. Now, John Bitroff is a native New Yorker, so he probably sounded like, "Hey, I'm walking here." But who knows, maybe John was able to change his voice. People can do accents. Just obviously not me. I'm sorry. In June 2019, a proposal was made to use genetic genealogy to identify the unidentified victims, and possibly therefore the killer himself. But we're still waiting on that. And that's to date on the Long Island serial killer. The main thing I'm really curious about is if the police will release Shannon Gilbert's 911 call. They've been fighting about it for a couple of years. There's been no update since January 2019 if and when they will actually release it. But if they do, I'll definitely update with any new information that comes to light. Actually, speaking of updates, many of the cases I've covered have since had updates and more information come out. So I'm planning on making a big old video going through every case and updates on it. Hopefully that should be out soon. I'll keep you tuned in. I don't know. I'll let you know when it's out anyway. And finally, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Let me know your thoughts on this case in the usual place, and I will see you, as always, real soon in the next video. Thanks again. Mike out.
The police failed to properly examine and assess the crime scene where Barry and Honey Sherman were located in the basement by the pool. They failed to recognize the suspicious and staged manner in which their bodies were situated.
Hey you, and welcome. My name is Mike, and in this video right here, we're going to look into the case of Barry and Honey Sherman. They were billionaires.
With a B.
And in 2017, Barry Sherman was the 12th wealthiest Canadian. And also in 2017, they died under very mysterious circumstances, and it remains, to date, an unsolved case. Barry Sherman had a good side and a bad side. And unsurprisingly, a lot of enemies. So, yeah, let's get into it. So, let's begin with a bit of a background of who Holly and especially Barry Sherman were. In 1973, Barry Sherman started pharmaceutical company Apotex. He had worked for various other drug companies before this in Canada and the United States, but Apotex would become the big one. By 2016, as CEO of Apotex, he oversaw a company that employed over 10,000 people and had a revenue of over $1.5 billion per year. They made the generic versions of brand name drugs, and it sells hundreds of products all over the world, and is one of the largest drug manufacturers in Canada.
Multinationals are simply parasites that come into Canada, set up branch plants simply for the purpose of exploiting our market to the maximum for their own benefit.
In 1971, he married Honey Reich, whom he would stay with for the rest of his life. Together, they had 4 children. Although Barry always turned up at charity galas with Honey, he was a complete workaholic, virtually incapable of small talk, constantly getting down to brass tacks. His family lived well, and Barry had a habit of quietly writing checks to Apotex employees who'd run into financial trouble. But Barry spent like next to nothing on himself. He would drive cars to work that were quite literally falling apart at the seams. The Shermans were a powerful presence in Toronto. Museums, campuses, community centres all seemed to have a space named after them or Apotex. He was a major member of Canada's political and business elite. Barry and Honey were among the country's most generous philanthropists, donating millions and supporting cultural and educational institutions, anti-poverty organizations, and, while Barry Sherman himself, he was an atheist and he didn't believe in God, a number of Jewish causes.
She wanted to help make sure that future generations would have a place that they could call home.
They were huge donors to the United Way and would regularly send millions of dollars worth of medicines to disaster zones. And this is when we get into what's called his 2 legacies. There's the good side we just went through, and then there's the bad side. Barry and his company faced many accusations that they gouged customers with high prices, and Apotex also regularly smeared its opponents. He would fundraise for Justin Trudeau's Liberal Party, while at the same time lobbying the government, and he was actually under investigation for this. University of Ottawa law professor Amir Attaran said he was a deplorable human being. People tend to believe he did great things for generic drugs in Canada, but Canadians pay more for generic drugs than almost every other country. He sought to manipulate our system to enrich himself and impoverish Canadian patients who used his drugs. At one point in the 1990s, German company Bayer AG, who invented aspirin, became convinced that Barry was infringing its patents and hired private investigators to recruit Apotex employees as informants, and even raised the possibility of planting a stash of illegal drugs in his car. Of course, they later denied this totally. One particularly notable case went on for about a decade. In the mid-1990s, University of Toronto hematologist Nancy Olivieri was running clinical trials for an Apotex drug designed to treat an inherited blood disorder. As the trials went on, she came to believe the drug might be ineffective and unsafe for patients. Apotex then threatened to sue if she disclosed her concerns and criticized the quality of her work to her superiors. Discussions Apotex were having with the University of Toronto about a major donation were then suspended, and Nancy Olivieri was removed from her position. In 2011, his cousins sued him, alleging he never paid royalties and equity in Apotex. You see, Barry built Apotex from proceeds he earned when their father, which would be Barry's uncle, sold his company, which was also a pharmaceutical company.
Barry lost his father when he was 9, and my father, Uncle Lou, took him under his wing and actually brought him into the business and gave him a summer job and I guess taught him the world of generics.
The cousins sought a 20% interest in Apotex, or damages of $1 billion. Barry responded by withdrawing millions of dollars in financial assistance to his cousins. The cousins contended that Barry had offered the financial assistance in the first place in order to make the cousins dependent on him and to keep them from learning about their rights to the business.
So financially, this idea that Barry Sherman was giving me money was not the truth. I was beholden to him. I was under his thumb.
Though, of course, this was denied by Barry. In 2017, an Ontario Superior Court justice ruled against the cousins, saying the case was wishful thinking and beyond fanciful. Barry Sherman won, and the judge ordered the cousins to pay him $300,000 in legal costs. The day after Barry and his wife Honey were buried, the lawyer filed an appeal for more money from the cousins. Barry also predicted what would happen to him. He was fully aware he was capable of shitty business practices, and so maybe all these donations and philanthropy kind of kept things in balance in his head. I don't know. In a 2001 book titled Prescription Games: Money, Ego and Power Inside the Pharmaceutical Industry, Barry Sherman discussed the long-running feud between Apotex and Big Pharma over drug patents.
All over the office there are stacks of documents related to litigation, filing cabinets full of them all over the floor as well.
The branded drug companies hate us. They have private investigators on us all the time. The thought once came to my mind, why didn't they hire someone to knock me off? For $1,000 paid to the right person, you can probably get someone killed. Perhaps I'm surprised that hasn't happened. On December 5th, 2017, 2 real estate agents arrived at the Sherman house near the northern edge of Toronto. They were accompanied by a couple who were considering buying the 12,000 square foot mansion recently listed for just under $7 million. The Shermans weren't supposed to be home that day. Walking into the basement where the pool was at the rear of the house, they found them. Barry and Honey were side by side on the floor, their necks tied with leather belts to the metal railing of the pool. Barry was seated, legs extended forward and crossed at the ankles. Honey was slumped on her side and appeared to have been struck in the face. Their arms were drawn back, held in place by coats pulled down below their shoulders. Both were facing away from the water and fully clothed, although one of the belts seemed to have been taken from Barry's trousers. It was impossible to tell how long they'd been dead. Post-mortem examinations showed the cause of both deaths was ligature neck compression, strangulation.
Tonight, the mystery deepening behind the double homicide of one of the world's richest couples.
Their murder has shaken the political establishment, with many wondering who could have wanted to see them dead and why.
Now, the billionaire founder of Canada's largest drugs firm, Barry Sherman, and his wife Honey have been found dead at their home in Toronto. Police describe the deaths as suspicious, but say they were not being treated as murder.
We've discovered 2 bodies of people inside a home here. The circumstances of their death appear suspicious.
Now to the mysterious death of a billionaire couple found hanging inside their mansion. Police are calling the death of pharmaceutical tycoon Barry Sherman and his wife Honey suspicious, saying both were strangled. ABC's Lindsay Janis here. She's tracking the case. Good morning, Lindsay.
Good morning, George. Friends and family are in shock. The couple, the Shermans, were philanthropists. Their company, Apotex, employs thousands of people in Canada and around the world, making hundreds of generic drugs. Now police want to know who would want them dead.
Barry and Honey Sherman were one of the world's wealthiest couples, worth $3.2 billion, thanks to their pharmaceutical empire.
We started Apotex in 1974, almost 40 years ago.
Known for giving tens of millions of dollars to charitable causes.
Remember this: our parents never left anyone behind. They were taken from us.
Forensic investigators were back at the couple's home today. The Shermans were found there Friday, strangled. CBC News has confirmed they were found beside the pool in the basement and that there are no security cameras in or outside the home. Homicide detectives are leading the investigation, but there is still no indication from police that the deaths are homicides.
Initially, there was no indication of forced entry, and the police, they weren't seeking suspects. The deaths were being treated as a possible murder-suicide, committed by Barry. The children of Barry and Honey were outraged at this. They hired Brian Greenspan, a respected Toronto criminal defense lawyer. Greenspan assembled a team of retired police detectives to conduct a separate investigation and began pushing back publicly against the idea that the absence of broken windows or locks meant the Shermans were alone when they died. There were certainly other ways to get in. The house had 9 entries, and the friends say the couple would think nothing of opening the front door for a stranger who rang the bell. There was also an outdoor lockbox with a compartment for a key, so the Shermans' real estate agent could hold viewings when no one was in. The lone surveillance camera at the house was located, oddly enough, in the pool area, but it hadn't been turned on for a long time, perhaps years. The family also hired a pathologist to conduct second autopsies of the bodies. Among the findings were narrow markings on both victims' wrists, evidence that, although no bindings were found at the scene, their hands had been tied at some point. Also odd was the position of Barry's legs, crossed in front of his body in a manner that hardly suggested the thrashing of a suicide.
The Sherman family felt it appropriate for the public to understand why they believe that it is time for a new initiative. On December 15th, 2017, as you know, Barry and Honey Sherman were discovered in the basement of their home in Toronto. Toronto police attended the scene, and before any investigative or inquiries had taken place, they came to the conclusion and announced to the public that there was no sign of forced entry and that they were not currently seeking any suspects. That misguided, indeed unfounded conclusion left the wrong impression that this was a self-inflicted crime, either a suicide or murder-suicide. That comment set the wheels in motion and conveyed a false sense of security to the public and devastation to the Sherman family. Police are required by law to maintain a certain professional standard in their approach to investigations, but in this case, at this stage of the investigation, the manner in which the Toronto Police Service conducted itself fell well below that standard of how a reasonable officer in similar circumstances should have acted. David Chasen, the retired chief forensic pathologist of Ontario, conducted the second autopsy on Wednesday, December 20th, 2017. The 3 homicide investigators present at this press conference today attended at the autopsy and were provided access to photographs of the crime scene. At the conclusion of Dr. Chasen's post-mortem examinations of Barry and Honey Sherman, it became clear that they were both murdered, and the Toronto Police Service should not have drawn any conclusion which suggested self-inflicted injuries.
The private investigators briefed the police that a murder-suicide couldn't be the explanation for what happened. And more than a month after the bodies were found, the police officially endorsed this view. In January, a homicide detective told reporters that the police were now describing the case as a double homicide investigation, and that both Honey and Barry Sherman were in fact targeted. Asked what had convinced the police, the detective replied, 6 weeks of evidence and its review.
We believe now, through the 6 weeks of work review, we have sufficient evidence to describe this as a double homicide investigation, and that both Honey and Barry Sherman were in fact targeted. We will continue to focus exclusively on evidence with whatever resources are necessary. We ask anyone to come forward with anything they may think is valuable to the investigation, and we, along with the family, are grateful for all those that have done so thus far. Thank you.
He wasn't this loving, kind person giving money away, pillar of the Jewish community. He cared about one thing: money, making lots of it.
and not caring who he destroyed, who he stepped on, or who he fucked over, like me and my brothers.
So who killed the Shermans? They had a lot of enemies, from other companies who were less than happy with Apotex's business practices, to extended family members who were bitter over money issues. He even said himself he didn't think it'd be hard to hire someone to take him out. And maybe that's exactly what happened. And the Shermans were pretty open people. They had no security to speak of, so getting access to their home doesn't sound like it would have been that difficult for the killer. The investigation is still continuing. The police are now fairly sure of the double homicide theory. Search warrants have been handed out, and whether they are closer to uncovering what really happened, we don't know. In October 2018, lawyer Brian Greenspan announced that the family had offered a $10 million reward in the couple's murder investigation for any information that leads to the arrest and prosecution of a suspect. Most recently, in April 2019, the Toronto police said they had a working theory on the case and an idea of what happened. What that is, we will just have to wait and see.